20 years in Afghanistan. Like, what were we thinking, right? Over 800,000 troops deployed, and if you add in Iraq, it's closer to 3 million. And of those, like half did more than one deployment, like 2 years away from family. Some of them did many deployments, maybe missing 3, 4, 5 years of a child's life. And then there were the many who didn't make it home, or really the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands who came back not the same, who had lost a limb or 2 limbs, or the mental illness, the suicide, the depression, the anxiety, child abuse, child neglect, alcoholism, substance abuse, all of those things just really off the chart. And all of those things being borne by a smaller and smaller number of American people whose families really suffer through these very difficult deployments. And even when you take out the kind of very human cost and you look at the financial cost, you know, that Brown University, they have a cost of war website, and they say the 800 billion we use for Afghanistan is really more like a couple of trillion when you add in the costs that'll be down the road. And for me, those numbers, they don't mean anything. I can't compute with them. But what I can is the image of Tamara Sullivan. She's the young mother, African-American, South Carolina, who went away to the war. And her second deployment, she left behind for a year, a 6-month-old and an 18-month-old. And when she came home, the marriage didn't make it. Her first husband is no longer living. And that kind of difficulty. And all of those troops right now, as we leave, are struggling. Because they're looking at a mission that began as a clear mission, right? We're going to get bin Laden, we're going to, decapitate the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And then it became a mission to build a democratic country, right? A country where girls could go to school and women could vote and people could make decisions about their lives. And then at some point, in the last 9-10 years, as the Taliban and insurgents have remained, it's been clear, just try to get out there, right? And so now you have the situation where literally the dams and the bridges and the people who were most educated, the young women, the judges, these are the people with the targets on their back who are being assassinated first by the Taliban. What were we thinking, right? Well, if we're old enough to remember September 11th, we know what we were thinking, right? Because who does not remember that day? Who does not remember the sight of those towers collapsing and people jumping from the building and the families that night standing in the street holding a picture, remember, of their loved ones? All of those people, where is this person? And then the next day and the next day, the images of those 19 hijackers. I mean, they lived here among us. They went to learn to fly planes with no idea of ever landing them. That evil to target civilians like that, we knew what they were thinking, right? We were gonna go there and, Bush said, well, we're gonna bomb them back to the Stone Age. And like everybody said, well, they're already in the Stone Age, hello. But the reality was Americans were behind that war. The 435 congressmen who voted on that authorization, one dissenting voice. Representative Barbara Lee from California, who said this authorization for military is just too broad. And it's been used now 24 times in the last 20 years to wage war in different places. But every senator went for it. And Americans signed up in record numbers. In the days after that, 200,000 Americans, young, idealistic, enlisted. 75,000 went forward to stand up to the National Guard. And you know why they did it? Because they wanted to defeat evil. Because they said, I'm going to protect my family, I'm going to protect my country. This is what I believe in, and I'm going to go after this demonic power. And what we saw in the next few months, right, was what the Taliban had been doing the 5 years before. Executions at the halftime of a soccer game for a couple who had sat too close, right? Stoning a woman whose burqa had come up. These guys with these beards driving around in jeeps with old Soviet missiles, Soviet machine guns, and the sexual slavery of children and all of that. And this is the tricky thing, though. Evil is not that easy to go after. And it's what we hear about in this gospel passage. In the gospel passage and in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has come to go toe-to-toe with the forces of evil, with the demons, with the unclean spirits. That is all really foreign to us, but it is central to Mark's gospel. All the gospel writers have got a different beat on who Jesus is. The Gospel of Matthew, it's the Sermon on the Mount, remember? I mean, the whole goal of being a person of faith is to lead this ethical life. Turn the other cheek, right, and share your coat and live this righteous life. Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, it starts off what? Jesus is like, Spirit of the Lord is upon me. I've been called to preach good news to the poor, liberty to captives, release right to the oppressed. It's this whole vision of liberation. John, he begins with what? The wedding feast. It's this banquet. It's this bounty. But in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' very first salvo is this opening battle. That's what scholars call it, with the unclean spirits. And Jesus is going to drive out this demon. And then as the passage moves along, it's kind of Jesus battling toe-to-toe with evil one more time. Remember just before this, in chapter 5, we got that really weird scene where a man is out of his mind and he's full of a legion of demons. It's like he's got a whole battalion of demons. Remember Jesus cast the demons out into the pigs and they run into the sea? I mean, it's like over and over, Jesus going against evil. And yet, it's not as easy as that, because just before this, what did I say? Even Jesus didn't have the power to drive out some of them. So it should be no surprise that a couple of chapters later, that the disciples find that their mission against the brokenness has failed, and they were told they can't do anything. I mean, you know, look at this country. I mean, the systemic racism, right? I mean, look at the way the pandemic has been handled, that all of this money went into these funds to help people, and who benefited the most, right? The people who already had. And these funds have been set aside to help black farmers. You know who gets the money most of the time is the white farmers. I mean, it's just been shown over and over again. Every single thing we ever put in place to try to address this racism in this country ends up helping white people more than anyone else. I mean, there's this weird thing. Evil does not go away easily. Captain Adrian Bonenberger enlisted in the military when he saw the evil. But the evil wasn't out there. It wasn't the guys with long beards. It was in here. And that's the other tricky thing about evil. There's this really weird line in Mark's gospel that comes up more than once where Jesus is going against this evil one, and the evil one looks at Jesus and says, "What do you have to do with me?" But the Greek is really, what do we have in common? Now that's a creepy line, isn't it? Like, who wants the monster to look at you and say, who wants the Taliban to look at our militia that went against this Capitol in January 6th, right, and say, what do we have in common? Who wants me to look at Jeff Bezos or whoever's launching into space and I'm critical of and think, what do I have in common with that ridiculous expenditure and waste of money when there are people hungry, when there are kids in the city? What do I have in common with that, right? But we don't want to ask that. Captain Bonenberger saw those pictures of Abu Ghraib, remember, in 2004, young men and women, Americans, torturing Iraqis. Remember that young woman, was her name Lindy, leading that man around on a leash? The pictures of those people standing, tortured to death. He saw those pictures and he thought, oh my God, how could we do that? He saw it as a massive failure of leadership, and he felt committed, he felt called to enlist and do something. In some ways, it was in his family. They could trace their lineage to the Mayflower. Everyone in his family had fought in one of the wars, from the Revolutionary War all the way up. His father had opposed the Vietnam War. He'd been a classical guitarist, and he became a corporate attorney. His mother was a poet who became a librarian. He had just graduated from Yale with a major in English literature. And he'd been considering law school, but he just didn't have a passion for it. And so he enlisted, and he went away to Afghanistan, believing he could make a difference. And on his first deployment, what he saw were, as he said, some failures of leadership, some examples where Americans behaved in ways that, rather than win the trust of the Afghani people, pushed them further away. So when he went back in 2010, and he's been covered extensively by James Dow, who covered the war in Afghanistan by the New York Times for more than a decade, and wrote a very long series of articles from March of 2010 to 2011 covering this year-long deployment. And Bonenberger went back for that deployment. Now he was going to be leading a combat unit. He was the captain, and he was proud and he was eager because he knew he could do it differently. And he talks in the writings about how his hopefulness and his idealism over that year moved towards really despair and questioning as he saw not just the corruption and the waste on the Afghani side, but the stupid and wasteful and predatory decisions made really to benefit people at Pentagon City that put U.S. soldiers and servicemen in more desperate situations. And so when he came home and left the military didn't leave him. And he was tormented by the demons, the monsters that would come to him in his dreams. He would remember the worst day. He had designed the mission and it had been approved. It was his idea to take this hill in Kunduz province. The Taliban had held that hill and they had rained down rockets onto the people in this village. He believed we could take that hill, and the election was coming up. An election so that the people there could make decisions about who would govern them. So he set about that mission with his men, the best women, their mind, and you can hear the audio tragically as the mines begin to explode and the men begin to cry out, and even their equipment was not equipped for the plastic mines that had been buried there. By the end of the day, one of his young soldiers had lost a leg and another had lost 2 legs. And that memory stayed with him and haunted him. And even after he came back to the States and was directing his men here, we all know that last month and the first month back is the most dangerous time for people. And there were those situations where the young people were drinking too much, and there was domestic violence, and there was the tragic killing of one of his men, Sergeant Pulaski, a great soldier who had saved his life more than once, who in a crazy moment got in a firefight and was killed by the police in Arizona. I mean, those memories haunted him, and he dealt with it by what so many of our young people have done, by drinking. He would every morning get up and he would write from 7 until 2, and then he would go to the gym and he would work out for an hour or 2, and 1 or 2 times a week he would see his therapist, and then he'd start drinking. On the weekdays, maybe just 4 or 5 drinks. On the weekends, 8, 9, and 10. And the monsters would just come to him, the evil, all of it, just tormenting. And his therapist said to him, "You have got to stop that." And at some point, he had to decide what he was going to carry and what he was going to let go. And that's the second very helpful word in Mark's gospel. Jesus looks at the disciples. He doesn't just send them out on this mission to do what? To cure and to heal and to drive out the demons. And this passage, because we don't come to the gospel like the first people do, it's exactly a reenactment of the Exodus story. They're told to carry the same things. The goal here is liberation. It's driving out the oppression. It's letting go of the hurtful parts of ourselves as well. So in Mark's gospel, Jesus is very clear what they're to take, and it's not very much. You know, it's just really your staff, the clothes on your back, and your sandals. But I like Mark's a lot better than Matthew and Luke, because in Matthew and Luke, you don't take anything. No sandals, no staff. The staff was to help you walk. It was to help to ward off the animals. Matthew is more following Luke and this Q source, which are more the kind of Christians that have pulled away completely and gone off to live in a cave, or decided, you know, they're going to be an Amish buggy, or the kind of Christians who say, America said it, damn it, that's it, right? Not us, right? We're the Mark Christians. I'm sorry, that's who we are. It's tough, because you have to ask yourself, what am I going to take and keep, folks? What am I going to really discern? You have got to look at the situation and think carefully. And you've got to think, what am I going to hold on to? And when Adrian Bonenberger came back, he had to decide what he was going to keep, or he was going to die. He had to decide the writing. The writing was his salvation. And he's written a book, he's written a journal, and more than that, he started a community of writers. Words After War. It's a movement to try to involve veterans, to bring them out, to have them write. And they've started book groups, too, to try to bridge the veterans-civilian divide, to try to bring people together to discuss literature. And you read their things, raw, haunting, powerful, and there will be this tagline in there, we haven't given up, right? It's this movement towards hope. He was lucky, of course, because he had parents community that could support him, had a wife now and a child, and he had to decide what he was going to let go of, right? The constant second guessing. What was I thinking? Why did I take us up on that hill? Why wasn't I there with Sergeant Pulaski? He saved my life twice. Why couldn't I? You know, at some point, right? Last week, I was with a friend from Texas A&M. We've known each other for 40 years. And I kind of started going down my 10 years ago, my church that I built was, and she said to me, how long is that going to be present for you? And I was my usual, well, my kids grew up there, and really, how long is that going to be present? I didn't lose a leg, I didn't lose a kid. How many minutes of our lives do we send and spend holding on to baggage that we have got to let go of so we can be what the very best people we can be, so that we can be absolutely present, so that we can get online and figure out what can I do involved with at the Veterans Community Project or the tiny houses. Can I raise my voice more next time and say, how many years of this? The invitation here is to be as brave as Captain Bonenberger, as selfless as Private Sullivan, and to ask ourselves every single day, you know, what is the mission I'm called to? And what should I carry? And what should I let go of? And then to take that and to decide we're going to turn it towards the healing, not just for ourselves, but for the world. That's an incredible gift, folks. And my prayer right now, in the coming days and weeks, as the hand wringing and the finger pointing and the blaming go on, is that we can look at our own lives in a really fresh, joyful way and think, what am I called to? What do I want to carry with me? Who are the people I'm going to travel with? What are the things that I'm going to just say, I have learned this from that, goodbye. I don't need that anymore, right? And where are we called, and what can we do to take everything that's been a part of our lives and offer up healing to this world that so needs it? Thanks be to God for this incredible call in our lives. Amen. Amen.